Okay, so today we're going to talk about some popular theoretical paradigms that we often use in criminology to see how they've been used to explain serial murder. This is all important because when we think about criminal profiling as a practice, all of what we know, or in terms of what we use for criminal profiling, was derived in some way from what we've learned about serial killers, social killers. Yeah, I'm not really that big of a killer, but I'm just a social killer. No? Okay. That's not. All right. Oh, what a good way to start. Are we going to go? Or there we go. Okay. So we're obviously not going to cover all of criminology. That's what criminological theory is for, and you will actually take that class from me at some point as well. But what we're going to focus on here today are some popular criminological theories that address crime in general that have been used by some to attempt to explain why serial killing occurs. Then we're going to focus lastly on some theories that were created to explain serial murder, right? So when people create theories behind crime, there's one of two ways to do it. You have general theories that explain why all crime occurs, and then you have more specific theories that focus on particular types of crime. And so we're going to cover some popular general ones, and then also two important and often used specific ones. So we'll start off with psychological explanations, move into sociological, and then do the murder-specific ones. So psychological explanations, while there are many, two that are quite popular are your dissociative disorders and your personality disorders. So let's talk a little bit about what do we mean by a psychological disorder. We hear that term a lot, and oftentimes we use it colloquially to describe people who we don't like or who we think are sort of abnormal. But in more technical terms, when someone has a disorder, it means that it disrupts their day-to-day life. So we can think about it from a more medical perspective. So when you have some sort of an illness, right, like a cold or the flu, but if you have some sort of a disease, right, it disrupts your day-to-day life. It stops you from doing things that you normally would do, right? When I have a cold, I turn into a total baby, and I want to be pampered, and I want my wife to bring me tea, and I just want to watch Netflix all day, right? So that disrupts my normal routines. You can think of a psychological disorder sort of like a sickness, in that it is certain aspects of your psychology that disrupts your day-to-day activities. So something that many of you know that I struggle with is anxiety. And I have been diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, meaning that sometimes I want to go to the shopping mall. Actually, I never want to go to the shopping mall. Shopping malls are useless because you have Amazon. But I wonder if I like Amazon only because I have anxiety. But nonetheless, one thing I really love is sports. I love going to sports events. Particularly, I love rugby, and I love some auto racing, mainly Formula One. I don't like much of the American racing, but nonetheless, it requires you to be around a lot of people. I've even flown to England before to go watch one rugby match. Yes, it was expensive. It was a very expensive weekend. But what happens to me often is when I'm in public around a lot of people, for some reason, I get extremely anxious, and it sometimes turns into panic attacks, to the point where I found myself avoiding going to public places, canceling plans with friends, not going to sports events that I desperately wanted to go to, not going to certain places because I perceive it as being too anxiety inducing, and eventually losing friends. In fact, I was once fired from a job because of my anxiety, and I was too anxious to tell my boss at the time that the reason why I was sort of anxious to leave work as soon as I could was because of my anxiety. Now, that was a very long time ago. That was like 10, maybe 15 years ago. So those things have, society has changed. Society has become a lot more accommodating to people with anxiety. But the thing is that I had plans, and those plans were ruined by my anxiety. Now, it might not be so straightforward for other people with different types of disorders, but think of disorders as something that disrupts people from what they normally would do. So there's two types of disorders from a psychological paradigm that have been used to explain crime in general, in addition to serial killing. So some of these are dissociative disorders. And by the way, on Blackboard, I've posted videos that are slightly more detailed regarding both dissociative disorders and personality disorders. So if you want an additional explanation, or you can also just read the book, right? Now, I will say the book is somewhat skimpy. Is that the right word to use? But it's a little brief when it comes to explaining how these disorders work. So let's talk about dissociative disorder. So the way to think about dissociative disorders are that they're sort of a spectrum. And with depersonalizations and derealization disorder being the least severe of them, and then the most severe one being dissociative identity disorder, which also used to be known as multiple personality disorder. But it took me a long time to really understand what dissociation is, because I've never really been in a situation, or I never really thought I was in a situation like that. But that makes sense, right? Because you're dissociated. Okay, all right. So dissociative disorders work like this. Think about, have you ever just sort of zoned out and like the best way to describe it is if you're on like a treadmill or an elliptical or whatever, Stairmaster, and next thing you know, like 25 minutes passed. Or maybe another very, very, very common example is, like, sometimes I'll drive to work, right? And all of a sudden I'll be like, what? How did I just get to work, right? How many times have you driven on a road and you've just sort of forgotten like 30 minutes of your drive, right? You still functioned, you still drove, right? But you don't remember squat. You were off in some la-la land, right? You were daydreaming, maybe thinking about an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, how you could have done better or how they did you wrong. Or maybe you thought about that one friend that you no longer talk to and you wonder what they're doing, right? That when you do that, you're being dissociated from the here and now. Right? You might not be paying attention completely to what you're seeing or to what you're hearing, right? Your conscious attention is not at the task at hand. You're dissociated from it. That's the best way to think about it. Now, most of us have been in some form of dissociation. Maybe some of us have done some LSD or shrooms or some sort of drug that helped us with that, right? I know that a lot of people will do ketamine, which will sometimes put them in, well, I don't think a lot of people do ketamine, but a lot of the people who do ketamine do it to experience some dissociation. And so, but dissociation is it's a normal part of our psychology, but when it begins to disrupt our day-to-day routines, at that point, it becomes a disorder. Right, and so on the lighter side, of things is the depersonalization or derealization disorder. So depersonalization or derealization disorder is when you feel like you're no longer a part of your body, right? It's almost like as if you're having an out-of-body experience. Some people have explained that they've seen themselves in the third person going about their lives. Or maybe you forget exactly, you don't forget, or you just dissociate yourself with of who you are or who you were. You sort of forget that for a momentary period. You forget what you're doing, what the task at hand is, where you're going, where you are even. But most of the time, these people snap back into it. Right? It's very seldom that someone just disappears completely, if you understand what I'm saying. The problem is that when you sort of lose control of who you are or what you're doing, when you dissociate like that, when you're having one of those derealization episodes, some people engage in criminal activity. Maybe you steal something. Maybe during one of those episodes, while they're driving, they completely lose touch with what they're doing and run over a pedestrian. Maybe on a different time, they completely lose touch with what they're doing and they end up stabbing someone to death. In the book, they mentioned this one guy said he just went into a state of dissociation, and next thing he knew, he drove 30 miles and shot his father-in-law. And while he was aware that it was happening, he was completely dissociated from it. He had felt that he had no control. It's sort of like your body goes on autopilot and you just sort of watch it happen. Dissociative identity disorder, on the other hand, is far more intense. Where, as opposed to having these bouts of being in and out of things with a DDD, with the DID, you have distinct personalities. Like there's almost distinct people living in your body. And so I know there was this movie made a couple of years back with this dude that became like several different people, and it's kind of like that. Right? You have one person who has their own memories, their own way of talking to people, their own way of doing things, and another person who might be completely different or somewhat similar. So to think about it like this: like it's like having one Roku with Netflix on it, or like having one Netflix account with like multiple logins. Right, like I have my Netflix, but then I gave my sister a login, so she has like a little square at the login screen, and I have my little square, and then my other sister's square, and my parents' little square. Right? Each of those, so if Netflix were to be your body, and each of those logins were to be a personality, that is what dissociative identity disorder is. But it gets a little more complex. So you actually have two forms of dissociative identity disorder. What we mostly focused on in the description thus far is overt dissociative identity disorder, where you have these multiple personalities almost living in your body, being in you, and when they switch, you don't necessarily understand that it's a bad thing. You don't necessarily understand that it's abnormal. It might even be to the point where you don't even know that that the other person in you exists. You just have these periods of not remembering anything until the other person comes back or sort of relinquishes control. Covert dissociative identity disorder, on the other hand, is when you're aware that this other personality is in you and it's almost like it's talking to you, right? And you know that it is not normal, right? So you might be in a situation where you feel like someone is talking to you, right? Where someone is taking control over you and you feel, so it's almost as if like your original personality doesn't turn off. It's just there's two people in you, or three or four people in you, and you know that they're there and you know they're taking control over you. Whereas with overt, you're not really aware of it, and the differences in your outside behavior. So what people see in your behavior, they will notice it, right? So with covert, you might be like, okay, shut up, I'm not gonna freaking do this, right? Or whatever it says for you to do, you might not display that behavior. You might not display behavior that shows to other people that there are multiple personalities in you. While when you have the overt, it seems to be that other people can notice. I hope that's a okay way to explain that. But there's another video that I posted on Blackboard that you can watch that does it much better than I do. And also you can read about it. Then we have personality disorders. Now, personality disorders are interesting because we're kind of still in the beginning of learning about personality disorders. Again, a lot of what a lot of the science of psychology has borrowed from the medical world, right? And so the way that a lot of psychologists or the science or the academic inquiry has matched or been very similar to the way that the medical academic inquiry has worked. And so there are certain things that are just a little more difficult to study and to completely identify in psychology compared to the medical world. Because in the medical world, right, if someone has a rash, they have a rash, and you can see that rash, and you can measure how big the little dots are on someone, and you can determine exactly what disease that is. But with psychology, these things are happening in someone's brain. These are processes that are happening inside someone's mind, and those processes are measured by the behavior or the perceived or the self-reported experiences of the person under study, right? So it's slightly more difficult to get exactly at what you are measuring. And so because of that, when you read about personality disorders, there's so much, and it changes often because we're still sort of early in trying to understand them. But the way to think of a personality disorder, right? Again, just because you know someone who does something that's weird doesn't mean that they have a disorder. They might just be a little odd, right? But a personality disorder, again, is when you have personality traits that disrupt your normal day-to-day routines. So think of them as an enduring pattern of outward behavior that impairs your ability to reach the goals you want, or to fit in with the rest of society, or be quote unquote normal. Sometimes that might show as obsessive, being unable to sympathize or empathize with people, or being unable to have relationships that work out, or where you're feeling absolutely no guilt, right? Those are all outcomes that we measure that emphasize some sort of a personality disorder. But the thing is that's very clear. It's like, so sometimes I can be a jerk, right? And maybe you can be a jerk sometimes. Think maybe about your romantic relationships. How many times have you said something super mean to your spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever friend, your partner or whatever, and you felt bad about it? Or maybe you didn't, or maybe it's just something that happened once. But it's when it's constantly happening, when it's something that defines your personality. At that point, it's it's more likely to become a personality disorder. So there are so many personality disorders that we can discuss, and it looks like in the science of psychology, what's happened was we initially identified all these different personality disorders, and then we realized, oh no, wait, it's kind of hard. Like they were getting too specific, so we started clustering them, and then we just looked at certain things. But now what's sort of common is what we call the big 5 super traits. So these are traits that have a bunch of sub-traits, but some of these factors that people look at are neuroticism, extroversion, openness to experiences, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, right? So we can measure someone's personality based on how neurotic are they? Are you pretty balanced compared to the rest of people? Are you less neurotic or more neurotic? Right? How extroverted are you? Are you someone who constantly has to be hanging out at the bars, talking to people? You're always yapping, talking? Or do you just sit there quietly and don't talk to anyone? Or do you fall somewhere in between? Openness to experiences, right? Think maybe about your friends right now. You have different friends who you know to invite to certain things, and other friends you know to not invite to those things, because you have some sort of a gauge of how open your friends are to certain types of experiences. Same thing. Agreeableness. Yeah, that's a big one. To what extent are you just a cantankerous jerk, right? We all have that friend, and maybe you're like, I don't have that friend. Well, guess what? If you don't have that friend, you are that friend who just never agrees with everything. They just have to turn everything into an argument. And I'm not talking about those people who like to have a lively debate every now and then. You know, you get those people like, well, on the other hand, or just to be devil advocate, that's fine. Those people are fine, right? But the people who are just never happy with anything, or they can just never agree. You can't just have a good time because they have to pee on your party somehow. They're just disagreeable. And then another very important one, and I think this is very important when it comes to understanding anti-personality disorder, which is what we're going to talk about, and that is conscientiousness. Those who don't know what conscientiousness is, it's sort of like being conscious of how other people might perceive things, right? So being a good teacher involves being conscientious, right? So how might someone else experience this, whatever I'm doing? Right, so being a parent involves trying to be conscientious. I'll give you guys an example. I remember one time, so my daughter right now is, or at the time when that was happening, she was like 1.5 years old. She just started to talk a little bit and discovering the shapes of things. And so one day, my wife and I are watching Netflix, and we're watching some documentary. It was very intense, and we were so sucked into it, and we were paying attention to it. And at the time, my daughter was just sort of playing around with something, and we're like, all right, whatever, she's not bothering her, so now let's focus on this Netflix show. And next thing you know, boom, TV goes off, right? And I'm like, we were right in the middle of finding out this vital piece of information. TV turns off, and this rage in me bubbled up from like my chest, like my stomach, chest area, and I could just feel it just coming up my chest. You know that rage feeling, right? And I'm just like, whoa, right? And then I look down, and my daughter has a Roku remote, and she had pressed the power button, which turned off both the Roku and the TV. And she goes, look, circle. So at that point, I had to stop myself from raging, because I had to put myself in her shoes and be like, okay, she just discovered something we've been teaching her abstractly, right? We've been showing her circles in books and stuff, right? It's abstract knowledge. And she applied that knowledge to something, to practice in the real world, a real remote that had a button that was circular on it, and she found it. So I had to put myself in her shoes. She just did something that's very important in her development, taking abstract things and seeing them in the real world. Now, how would that have been reinforced in her if I had screamed at her? Do you think she would want to do things like that again? Do you think she'd want to point out to me that she's learned something ever again if I had screamed at her? No. It's because I was able to put myself in her shoes for that moment. I was conscientious. So in relation to murder, right? We've all of us here have at some point, maybe especially when we were younger, when we were still developing, we've really hated people. And I'm sure there's one person in high school that you hated. Maybe they were trying to get with your partner at that time, right? I was lucky enough. I was with someone who was very good looking in high school. I don't know why she was. She was slumming it with me, to be honest. I'm never really been a good looking dude. Definitely not good looking in high school. But I was with her. But all these guys would constantly hit on her, and it irked me. And I've gotten over that, and I've realized that it's stupid to be jealous. It really is. When you're jealous in a relationship, it is because you're not confident in your own ability to be better than all those other people. That's why you're jealous. So when you're jealous, it's not their fault, it's your own fault. Figure out why you're jealous and address it. But nonetheless, there were some of those dudes I was like, man, I would kill you. But I was 16. I don't really know what that meant. I wasn't conscientious enough that kid, that dude that's hitting on my girlfriend is someone's son. Someone's little baby. Like my child. Right? Someone loved that person as much as I love my daughter. Someone put so much financial and emotional and time resources into having that person who I want dead to be alive at that point in time. Do you know how much money you put into a child over a period of 16 years? Do you know the financial investment, the emotional toll, and the time resources it takes to raise a person for 16 years? And here I am upset because it's making me jealous that he's hitting on my girlfriend. I want to end that life. Most of us, at least to some extent, are conscientious enough to understand what's going on, to understand that it's not good to murder someone. But people with anti-personality disorder or with some sort of personality disorder who lack conscientiousness might not see that. They might be so self-absorbed that they just don't even care. Whatever. It's still jealous. Like when people are like, well, he disrespected me, so I murdered him in the streets. Right? You get that a lot with gang members. You ask a gang member why they killed someone. Well, he disrespected me. What the hell is disrespect anyways? Seriously, what is disrespect, dude? But social theories will help us understand why disrespect is so important. So anti-personality disorder then is a certain grouping of personality traits antisocial personality that tends to make us sort of stand out. You're sort of a thorn in the side to society. You're a menace in a way. And then many people who struggle with antisocial personality end up, but not all, end up being addressed by the criminal justice system in some way, or maybe not by the criminal justice system. Maybe they get suspended from school. Maybe they can't lock down friends for a long time. Maybe they can't hold relationships long term, or maybe they're constantly having turnover where they work, right? And so people with antisocial personality disorder can sort of generally be classified as APD, or they can either be sociopaths or psychopaths, and we're going to talk about those a little later. Actually, next topic is going to solely focus on psychopathic and sociopathic killers, because they make up a pretty large portion of a certain subset like that subset of serial killers that we care about the most, right? Those like Dexter-ish type of serial killers, not someone who by definition is a serial killer because they belong to a gang, right? But they're just, they've just killed a lot of drug competitors, drug sales competitors, but they would also be considered serial killers when you define them as someone who's killed more than 2 people, right? But they're not like a calculated killer, or they're not like a psycho killer. Like, maybe like the clown. Oh my gosh, the clown from American Horror Story 4. Oh my goodness. That was, dude, I had a thing about clowns, didn't like clowns. I saw that the original It movie, that freaked me out. But then when I watched American Horror Story 4 and I saw that wacky clown, oh my gosh. A new appreciation to not like clowns. The new It, the new Pennywise, blech, I'm not even scared of you. It's sort of comical. I ain't shook. But man, American Horror Story 4, that had me shook. Okay. But essentially, a sociopath is someone who is highly antisocial. They don't care about social norms. They can seldom hold down a job or fit in with society, don't care about anyone but themselves, and you can overtly see that. Right? Everyone knows them as just being, wow, dude, seriously. But a psychopath is someone who is able to, despite being truly antisocial, still able to fit in. So like Dexter is actually a psychopath, or that many world leaders would score high on the psychopathy scale. So that's something to think about. But we're going to talk about that in far more detail later on. Some sociological explanations that have been used to explain crime in general have focused much on social processes and social conflict and social structure and also social control. 2 things I want to discuss here is social structure. When you think about social structure in relation to crime, think about it as the way that society has been set up by people can sometimes make it easier for crime to happen. So what I mean by that is things like race are, you might be like, well, yeah, you can see someone looks different from one person to another, but the fact that we noticed that difference and categorized it is still a creation. It's still a social construction. It's something that we decided to claim is real. Right? Same with ethnicity. Because in the end, like, ethnicity is just sort of like, yeah, dude, I was born here, or I come from these types of people, or I speak this language. Right? But all of those things are created, are constructed socially. At some point, people said, okay, well, we're going to define this. And the second you define something, you create it socially. Socioeconomic status is something that's a very important factor associated with social structure, because oftentimes your income and education impacts where you are in the scale of things, where you exist, right? I'd probably consider myself to be lower middle class, meaning that I'll probably be in some sort of debt for most of my life. Will I ever be able to fly first class to Monaco and go on a yacht trip for a week? No, because I will never be able to afford that, right? And when I can't afford that, I'm excluded from being in certain social circles, being around certain people, doing certain things with those people. Right? Now, if you look at it on the other side of the coin, right? Okay, so what if I'm extremely poor? What am I allowed to do? And what I mean by allowed, like, what are the activities that I'm most likely going to be engaging in, right? So let's think about, so some people always ask, why do some people do drugs out on the street, right? Well, Even people who aren't homeless will sometimes do drugs out on the street, and that has a lot to do with social structure, especially socioeconomic status. For instance, I grew up in a upper middle class family, actually. My parents are well off, right? And as a result, we lived at the end of a cul-de-sac in Northern Virginia. Behind our house was woods. You couldn't see into our yard from our neighbors' properties because my parents lived on a pretty big piece of land. And then we also had hedges on each side. So if I wanted to, let's say, smoke a bunch of hash with my friends, right, and my parents were both at work, because most people who live in upper middle class, both their parents are working. So both my parents are working. I'm home, let's say from college, or maybe it's summertime or whatever. I'm not going anywhere. It's a Monday afternoon at 2, and I want to smoke some hash. Well, the safest thing to do, right, would be to smoke that hash in my parents' backyard, where we know no one will see us and no one will catch us. Moreover, after you're all high, we don't have to drive anywhere, we don't have to walk anywhere and talk to anyone and endanger ourselves unnecessarily. The fact that we have that opportunity to do that drug in such a safe way is directly tied to our socioeconomic status. Moreover, my socioeconomic status allowed me to buy hash, which is a somewhat safer drug to do than some of the other cheaper drugs that you find out on the street. Now, someone who lives in a low socioeconomic situation, so let's say a single mom, dad is out of the picture, maybe dad's in jail or in prison, or maybe dad's just completely out of the picture. And I have three siblings, and we all live in a 1-bedroom apartment because that's all that my single working mom can afford. Now, I get tempted to smoke some weed, right? My friends are like, yo, let's smoke some weed. I go to my apartment, my mom's apartment, and my mom says, you better not bring that stuff into my house. You're never going to smoke that stuff in my house. I'm not going to have DCS come in here and take my kids away just because you're trying to smoke some weed. That stuff's not going to be in my house. So I say to my friend, let's go to your house. Well, my mom says the same thing. Other friend, my mom says the same thing. Okay, well, we live in the city. Where are we going to go? Well, there's this alleyway not too far from here. Or there's this park not too far from here. And so what does that do? It opens your socioeconomic status, opens you up to different criminogenic circumstances. And it's not your fault. Yes, the decision is at some point made, but the decisions you have to, or the options you have to pick from, are severely limited by your socioeconomic status. And the alternatives might not even be known to you because of your socioeconomic status. So while people are rational, that rationality is bound by social structure sometimes. Sometimes social structure can cause people to become frustrated. That's called social strain. And so people who are serial killers or killers might be on the fringes of different socioeconomic groups or different subcultures. They might not quite fit in where they think they should be fitting into. And it could potentially cause some strain, causing them to reach desirable goals with deviant means. However, a much more popular social explanation for a lot of crime, most crime, and especially serial murder, is social control. I love social control theory because, unlike many other sociological theories, it doesn't ask why do people commit crime. It asks why don't people commit crime. And I love that because why not? One thing that I've done, have you ever been at a stop sign especially I lived in a city for a very long time. So I'd be driving. You get to a stop, a red light, right? There's a crosswalk, and the red light's there. And my foot is on the brake pedal. And a whole group of unsuspecting pedestrians are just crossing the street because they know the light's green for them. They can cross. They don't even look at me. They don't even acknowledge that I exist. They're on their phones, headphones in, they're in conversation. They're in their own little world. And they're just walking across a street, all because the color of a light told them that they could. Have you ever become aware of that all you have to do is literally just lift your foot off the brake pedal? You don't even have to hit the gas, and you could probably injure someone. If you hit the gas, you could kill someone, kill one of them. But what is keeping you from doing that? Literally, the color red is the only thing that is making me not just move my foot a little bit to kill someone. We've all had those thoughts. So what's stopping you? Well, social controls. For some reason, we are saying, it's better for me to just not do that. No matter how much I want to do that, it's better for me to just not do that. Because my wife would leave me. What would my child think of me? I'd lose my job. I wouldn't be able to ever go to Italy like I so badly do, because I'll be in jail or in prison. All these social institutions that we want to be a part of because for selfish reasons keep us from doing other selfish things. And we call that control over our behavior, social control. Think about it for a second. I want you to sit there and think, if there was nothing or no one that you were accountable to in this world. Let's say it was like, in Grand Theft Auto, where you put in the cheat codes and you get unlimited money and cars and all that. If you had the cheat code on, how different would your life be? What would you be doing? Would you be climbing up onto high buildings? Would you fly a helicopter to the top of the highest building in Los Santos and then parachute off onto that building, let the helicopter just crash into society, and then sit there with a sniper rifle and pick people off to see how far they run or how much they freak out? When you knew that no one would leave you, no one would think ill of you, you wouldn't lose any money or status. That is social control. And so people who kill, for some reason, don't have those controls in their lives. Something is not stopping them. Do you guys see that different explanations for criminal behavior give us different thoughts for how to stop that criminal behavior? Well, what kind of policies and programs could we implement to create social controls? Okay. Then we get theories or explanations that are based in serial killing itself. This is stuff that we've gleaned from people who have solely studied serial killers. So these are specific explanations. The first and one of the most popular ones is the Macdonald Triad. So first, I need to say that the Macdonald Triad does not predict serial killing. If you see someone that has all three of these, it doesn't mean they're going to be killing people. But what we do know is that many serial killers possess these three things. And so these behaviors, these three behaviors, animal cruelty, enuresis, whatever, peeing the bed, okay? And fire setting are things that are behaviors that have been displayed in the childhoods of many serial killers. However, the theory emphasizes the importance of your formative years of your childhood when you are being shaped into a person. And one thing that they found is that people who display these behaviors and who end up killing experienced significant trauma or stress or degradation as a child. Again, think of it like this, right? When you're a child, you're a completely clean, empty canvas to some extent, right? There are some theories that say that we are naturally animalistic, but whatever, okay? From a memory bank standpoint, for the most part, you are a blank slate. Now, but most people experience pretty chill childhoods. Our parents love us. They want the best for us. We don't get our asses beat too much. When we do good things, we are given a pat on the back, right? We are taken to the zoo to see the pretty giraffes. We learn songs about, cutting people's heads off. Isn't that what Ring Around the Rosie's about? Or isn't Ring Around the Rosie about the plague? I don't know, whatever. But we learn little nursery rhymes and the ABCs and Elmo song. And life is peachy. But unfortunately, not all children have that. Some children are viewed as a burden, disruption by their parents. Some people's parents become so frustrated with the realities of child rearing that they take it out on the child. And I get it to some extent. Like, I understand why people are... I don't excuse it. I don't justify it, but I understand how people get to that point of wanting to hurt their children. It's frustrating. When you are tired, and your child just will not go to sleep. Or when you have to get work done, and your child just will not stop screaming. Or if you just want to have one hot meal for the first time in 2 months, but your child demands your attention at dinner time. When you just want to watch one episode of Mindhunter, but your child demands to watch videos of Elmo on repeat. I get it. The reality of it is that when you have a child, when you bring a child into this life, expect the person you were before that is now dead. Okay, you guys ever seen the show The Witcher? At some point, this Yennefer, she turns into a beautiful sorceress, and when that happens, it takes her womb away, so she's no longer allowed to have children. And so the thing that's uttered to her is a life for a life, and that's very true when it comes to having a child, and that you give up your life for that child's life. You're done. Your life, the person you were before that, is gone. Is dead. They're gone. Get over it. The problem is that some people don't want to get over it. Some people blame the child, and the thing is, you just have to accept it. The video game loving, always guitar playing, Netflix watching, show binging Martin is dead. You can't be alive anymore. You can't have a child with a good life if that Martin is still alive. But a lot of the children who go through these stresses, these traumatizations early in life, have parents who don't want to do that. Parents who resent their children. Or some parents just get joy out of being cruel to their children. The thing is that cruelty And stress and trauma is most of what you know, right? Some of us might have experienced some traumatic episodes as children, but we know that those were isolated incidents. It wasn't the norm for us. But for a lot of serial killers, trauma or stress or distress was the norm. It was more than likely to happen. And so as a result, you see these three behaviors, the Macdonald Triad, in some serial killers when they were children. And that is animal cruelty, which can be defined by, being overly controlling of the animal's behaviors, retaliating, hurting the animal, sometimes killing it, torturing it, being mean to it. A lot of people see that as sort of like this mimicking of, okay, you're sort of practicing. And think about that, right? If you're being mean to a dog, if you can handle that, you can definitely handle being mean to a person. Right? How many of you are sitting there right now and you're like, man, I could punch a dude, or I could stab a dude, but I couldn't stab a dog. Right? There's so many of us here who believe that humans deserve more cruelty than dogs do, right? Because we're dog lovers. Yeah, so if you practice killing dogs, just think how much easier it would be to kill a human being when you get up there. Bedwetting is often something that's tied to some sort of serious physical or emotional or even sexual abuse. Right? There's this odd anxiety component to it that's hard to isolate. But one thing that we do know is that the children who do bedwetting had experienced some sort of abuse or neglect at a young age. And then lastly, fire setting. Now, fire setting is something I've had a lot of experience with. I loved, as a kid, lighting fires. But I wasn't cruel to animals, nor do I remember peeing the bed. I'm sure I peed the bed like once. I never even peed the bed when I was in college. When when everyone starts binge drinking in college, some people pee the bed. I never even did that. But then again, I also didn't drink that hard. Or did I? Who knows? But fire setting, and I get fire setting. Have you ever just watched something burn? There's a weird catharsis to that. The thing that always excited me or intrigued me about fire was it starts from such a small little flame and it turns into this almost uncontrollable chaos that is destructive. That's intoxicating. It's great to just watch a fire just go off. It's just one little match and all of a sudden a whole building burns down. That's quite amazing. So I can totally see how fire setting would be involved in the triad. Lastly, another way to understand serial killing is through the trauma control model. And essentially it has two main factors, and that is you get certain things that predispose you to be more likely to get involved in serial killing. So this could be genetic. They found that some serial killers have a different genetic structure than people who don't kill. It might be socialization factors. You might be sexually abused as a child, or neglected, or neglect is actually a big thing, right? So you experience some sort of social rejection that is involved with causing some psychological problems, right? That over time is reinforced. Now, a lot of people think that you experience some sort of, so you have these predisposing factors, and then some traumatic event happens in your childhood, right? A lot of people link childhood to it. And again, as we've explained, during your first years, right, that sort of sets your life trajectory. Think about the first time think about something that everyone likes but you don't like. So I'll use this as an example, but I do love it. Chipotle. Okay? First time I ever went to Chipotle, I actually did not like it. I was like, this is bland. This is not for me. Right? And it took me a very, very long time to finally be forced to try Chipotle again. And then so essentially the first time I had Chipotle, I didn't put the right combination of ingredients on it because it was in my hands to decide what to get on it. And it didn't taste that good. And so the second time I went, which is several years later, was when my friend was like, look, I'll tell you what to get. Right? And I was like, all right, fine. And then after that, I loved it. Now I love Chipotle. But your childhood's the same way. If you are experiencing a lot of traumatizations, abuse, psychological abuse, social abuse, neglect as a child, right? That is the first time you have Chipotle. That says, oh, this is what life is. Life is this cruel, crazy world. It sets the norm for you. Now, as you go throughout life, there are these chances, right? You meet people, you learn, oh, wait, my childhood was abnormal. Oh, I shouldn't live that way. Okay, cool, I get it now, and everything is peachy. Or, because of the way you were raised as a child, it makes it difficult for you to socialize with people who are part of normal society. So those values that they all live by, you don't get them. They don't appeal to you. They're not introduced to you. Those people themselves are mean to you. They also reject you. And so the cruelness of the world is reinforced over and over and over. And then you think of the behavior that you thought that was normal towards you, which is abuse, hurting, trauma. You start to think, oh, well, maybe that's the way that I behave. You might understand, okay, well, it's illegal, but I really want to do it. But it's illegal, but I really want to do it. What else do I have to live for, really? What else do I have left to care for, really? If you find no joy in anything, if you can't find someone to give you love and companionship, or of the love and companionship that someone that quote-unquote normal society offers is not what appeals to you because of the way that you were raised, what's legal and illegal begins to matter less and less and less and less. So these feelings, the way you were raised, your experiences are reinforced over time. And with some people, they start to have violent fantasies. They find exhilaration, they find excitement, fulfillment in those fantasies. And the same way, like, think about when you had a crush on someone when you were maybe in middle school and high school, or even now in college, you have a crush on someone and you think about them and you think about them and eventually you just go ahead and you ask them out. You ask them to prom, or you go to a college party, you get drunk, and you finally tell this person how you really feel about them. But at some point, these fantasies overwhelm you. And then maybe you get drunk, or maybe your sexual or violent urges just are too much to repress at this point, and you must act on them. Just like when you want to tell someone you love them or you want to ask them out, you're done just creepily having a crush on someone and not telling them. You just want them to know because you want to be with them. Except in this case, you want to see someone die and you want to see the life leave their eyes. You've been thinking about it your whole life. And there's nothing more exhilarating than having that control over someone. This person means something to someone else, and now I get to take the life out of them and I get to watch it leave their eyes. That's how the trauma control model works.